We have some more NHL signings to discuss, including the Ottawa Senators locking up defenseman Thomas Chabot. Plus, we also have signings for the Maple Leafs and the Oilers. Plus, we have all the latest NHL trade rumors involving the Canucks, the Calgary Flames, the Carolina Hurricanes, and the Winnipeg Jets, as well as the Dallas Stars and the Montreal Canadiens. We'll get into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have some breaking news from around the NHL and some trade rumors I'd like to discuss with you here today. First off, just a quick little disclosure. I am battling a cold, so if I sound a little different today, that is the reason why. You don't have to adjust anything on your end. Just my voice is a little bit off due to this cold, and hopefully it'll take a hike here and go away very soon. Now, the first big news of the day is the Ottawa Senators have locked up defenseman Thomas Chabot on an 8-year, $64 million contract, which is probably the best news that the Senators have had in really a long time. Of course, they also locked up young forward Colin White on a 6-year deal earlier this offseason. Thomas Chabot's entering the final year of his entry-level contract. He would have been an RFA next year, so of course, following suit with a guy like Clayton Keller, who was also in the same predicament, entering the final year of his entry-level contract. Obviously, GMs are trying to get ahead of their RFAs for next year because they don't want to see happen what's going on this year and all these guys. It's still halfway through training camp here and no contracts. There's still a lot out there. So obviously the Senators are spending some big money. It's a little bit unusual for them. They've been in cost-cutting mode for quite a substantial period of time. But overall, I think this is a great contract for Chabot. It's great to see a commitment from a young player to want to stick around and be a big part of the organization. It's also a great step to see the organization commit to a young player on such a lucrative contract as well. So overall, it's a real positive story here for the Senators. Of course, Thomas Chabot put up 55 points last year. Certainly regarded to be one of the top young defensemen, at least in the NHL. Next year, once his contract extension kicks in, he will become one of the higher paid defensemen around the NHL. But really, throughout this 8-year term, I really do think it's worthwhile. He's going to be paid $7 million for the first couple of years, then it dips down to $4 million, then it goes up to 8 and 10 throughout the remainder of the contract. Now, they're buying up 4 unrestricted free agent years with this 8-year extension, and in the final 4 years of that deal, where he could have possibly been a UFA, he did get a modified no trade clause as well. There's a 10-team list that he can veto any trades to as well. So really, I think Thomas Chabot is going to continue to evolve into being one of the more exciting, more offensive young defensemen around the NHL. So long term, I think this is a great signing for him. I think it's a very valuable, very fair contract, and it's a great deal for the Senators. Nice to see them getting some of their young talent locked up, so hopefully they're not in the same predicament here in the future like they have been over the last couple of years with the mass exodus of talent that they've had leave town over the last year or two. So great news story there. On to Maple Leafs signing 2019 NHL draft selection Nick Robertson to his 3-year entry-level contract. Now, he's going to be remaining playing in junior for at least one more season for sure, but at the very least, though, it's a pretty decent signing. He does look to be a pretty decent forward prospect. And of course, there's also some news out of the Edmonton Oilers as well, that they're apparently bringing in Anton Bertasov, who's been playing over in the KHL, a Russian forward on a professional tryout. He is expected to join the team and begin practicing with them here in short order. There is some talk out there that if they're impressed with him, that they might agree to sign him to a 1-year contract worth around $1.7 million. But Oilers sources right now are not confirming that. They're saying that there's not a lot of truth to that. I mean, obviously he could get signed, but apparently he does have offers from the KHL as well. And it's not quite clear exactly, what the conversion to American dollars would be on those contract offers. I'm not sure what he's got on the table. But either way, as we know, the Oilers have a lot of openings, especially on the wings. If they can find some guys that come in, especially on lower valued contracts, to provide some secondary scoring, it very well could be a good fit. I know there's some other NHL teams that are showing interest in Bertasov as well, so I guess we'll see if he ends up signing with the Oilers or how things work out. But either way, another promising player to join the Oilers training camp. Now, jumping over to the latest NHL trade rumors, this comes from a variety of sources, mostly Elliot Friedman, a little bit from Pierre LeBrun. Elliot Friedman was on Sportsnet 650 in the Vancouver feed, talking about a lot of the latest NHL rumors. Of course, he touched on the Canucks as well. So basically, he was indicating that the Vancouver Canucks, the Calgary Flames, and the Carolina Hurricanes were 3 teams to watch here, that they're likely all in the mode of trying to move some players out, but the problem is that they're mostly all depth players and nothing higher end as well. Talking about bottom 6 forwards for the most part. The only real exception to that would be in Carolina, with Justin Falk being, a fairly decent defenseman who can provide some offense that obviously we know is on the trade market as well. They're all kind of in different predicaments here. In Vancouver's case, they're technically cap compliant, but they have way too many forwards. They're going to likely have to put some players through waivers to go down to the American Hockey League, and it's not quite clear between the information from Friedman and even J.D. Burke, who writes for The Athletic as well, indicating that some key names that he felt that they would be likely looking to move would be a player like Brendan Sutter, perhaps Tim Schaller, who I know really wasn't a great fit after he signed. He's only got one more year left on his contract, and he also said he wouldn't be surprised if Jake Virtanen's name was kind of floated around out there as well. I'm not sure that they're really aggressively trying to trade Virtanen. I wouldn't think that would be the case. I think they would consider it under the right circumstances, under the right offer. I mean, I know he had a slow start to training camp, but in that preseason game, he did bounce back with 2 goals. So we'll see how it goes. I know there seems to be a lot of patience for Virtanen, but I guess we'll see if they decide to move on, but I don't see him being a prime trade target. I think it's just something they would consider for the right deal, but I don't really think the Canucks are really going after anything significant. I think they're just trying to move out some extra depth players that they're either looking to move to the American Hockey League, free up a little bit of cap space. Obviously guys like Schaller would accomplish that. Sutter, to an extent, you have to wonder if it's really worth them doing that. They do need some veterans. I mean, he can be a valuable piece, especially like a number 3 center iceman. So I know there's been a lot of talk around him possibly being moved. He has looked decent so far in the preseason and training camp, so there might be a little bit of value and intention there, but it's hard right now. And what Friedman was kind of explaining is that because there's so many teams tight up against the cap, and we saw such a little increase this year, and it's expected to do the same thing for at least 1, maybe 2 more years, the cap's likely not going to be increasing a lot over the next year or 2 either, until we get to the point that the Seattle franchise comes in and the American TV contract kicks in as well. So we're not going to be seeing some significant increases that way. So teams are going to kind of be in tough here and trying to make these types of moves, especially when you get depth players. There's not a lot of options. Now, in the Flames case, they're really trying to get Matthew Tkachuk signed, and they are tight against the cap. There's been a lot of talk about Michael Frolik being moved out, and there still appears to be trying to do that, and just not having a lot of success right now in finding the right fit. But obviously getting Tkachuk signed is paramount. I mean, he was one of their best players last year and proved to be an extremely valuable piece. Obviously, if Matthew Tkachuk ends up missing time at the beginning of the regular season, that's going to be a big blow and could have a major impact. And of course, as we know, when players tend to miss camp and even the beginning of the season, that tends to not bode well for having a successful year when they do come back. So hopefully they can figure this out. But the Flames, like the Canucks, are certainly trying to move some bodies out. They've had to bring some more bodies back in on their blue line because of the injury to Valimaki as well. So that kind of complicated things too. But they're still trying to move Michael Frolik for sure. In regards to the Carolina Hurricanes, obviously we know that they've been trying to trade Justin Falk. They were rumored to be interested in Dallas Stars defenseman Julius Honka, but it was kind of contingent on them trading Falk, which never ended up happening. That the deal between the Anaheim Ducks and the Carolina Hurricanes involving Justin Falk likely is a dead deal at this point in time, but Falk did not get the extension that he was looking for when they discussed it, apparently is what was said, and therefore no deal ended up taking place. But of course, in Carolina's case, with the interest in Julius Honka, they've since signed Freddie Claesson, who's a little bit older. He's a guy that's been around the NHL and AHL for some time, between his time with the Ottawa Senators and then last year with the Rangers. So where they've already added another guy like Claesson, I would probably be a little bit surprised if they were still trying to bring in Julius Honka. And they have a lot of other younger guys as well, like Jake Bean. And in my opinion, Bean looks like he's NHL already, but he's going to have a hard time getting playing time because of all the guys ahead of him on their depth chart there. So the Hurricanes, not really sure that they're really interested in Honka any longer, but a team that is the Montreal Canadiens. Seems to be the issue with making a deal there is the Dallas Stars would prefer to get a draft pick back, but the Montreal Canadiens want to have a player off their roster in order to bring Honka in. So they want to trade a player, and Dallas prefers to get a draft pick. Obviously, if they get a pick in return instead of a player, probably a little bit more favorable for the cap purposes. And the same for Montreal. If they have money going in, money going out, it doesn't really change a whole lot that way, but they're obviously having a difficult time coming to an agreement in that regard, which is why Honka is still a member of the Dallas Stars and not a Montreal Canadian. But clearly the Habs are looking to make some moves in that regard, have some extra depth on the blue line, and get Honka a fresh start. They obviously see something that they feel they can work with and help him realize his potential here. So we'll see if the Stars or the Habs budget all on what they're looking for and if the deal can be struck. Now lastly, when it comes to the NHL Trade Rumours, I want to take a look at the Winnipeg Jets. There's a lot of talk around them right now. Obviously, in the last few days, we've talked about the Dustin Byfuglien situation. We've got all the Line A drama. And now Pierre LeBrun had kind of speculated with Byfuglien potentially being out for, a significant period of time, maybe not even coming back at all. Will the Winnipeg Jets maybe look to acquire a top defenseman like a Justin Falk in Carolina, or even a Rasmus Ristolainen out of Buffalo? I mean, we had talked about the possibility of Ristolainen being a potential trade target for them earlier in the offseason. Of course, nothing came to be. We did get confirmation that Ristolainen would have welcomed a change, but of course, he ended up in camp with the Sabres, and, has put on a smile on his face and said he's happy to be there and all that. But I think, he likely still would welcome a move if a deal were to be found. But Justin Falk might be a good addition to them as well. Obviously, he can be a power play quarterback and add some offense from the back end. And they're clearly going to be missing that with guys like Trouba and, Bufflin and Myers and Sherratt. Like, that blue line is completely, obliterated here. There's not a lot of experience back there except for Josh Morrissey. So they need some help. Same time, their hands are kind of tied with the salary cap. They've got about $15 million, but they got to sign Laine and Connor, which they're having a hard time coming to terms with either of those players. They don't know exactly what they can really afford to look at. I mean, if Dustin Bufflin ends up retiring, then they'll get the cap relief. But ultimately, if he's not, then they may or may not be able to. Depends on how the league ends up listing him on their roster. Perhaps he can be listed as a non-roster player, like an active non-roster player or something to that effect. They might be able to get some cap relief, but there's a possibility that while Bufflin's deciding his future, that they may not be able to do that, which kind of ties their hands here until they get Laine and Connor situated. I mean, there's been some people saying, well, maybe with all the Laine drama, would they consider trading him for a top D? And I really don't think they really want to go down that road. But I guess if they felt like they could, Laine is certainly a type of player, a really young, high-scoring forward who can, pot 30, 40, 50 goals. There wouldn't be a lack of interest, that's for sure. And I think teams would be willing to pay a pretty decent price for him. So it's the right trade chip. But do you really want to lose your first-round pick from only a few years ago, who's proven to be a 30, 40 goal scorer, even though he may not be the perfect player and obviously has things to work on? The fact that he can score at those rates is pretty crazy. So I'm sure that the Jets do not want to trade Laine. But I guess we'll see what happens. They certainly have more riches at the forward position than they do in the blue line right now, and they might have to make a move of some sort to make that blue line a little stronger. Otherwise, they might end up in trouble this year and taking some major steps backwards. But either way, I do expect some moves to be made as we get a little bit further into training camp and further into the preseason before the actual season kicks off and gets underway here. And those are the main teams right now that we talked about today, but the Jets, the Hurricanes, the Flames, and the Canucks that you can certainly keep your eyes on for some potential moves. Of course, as always, I want to know your thoughts on everything we discussed here today. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.